Cosmo.
We're recording and Cosmo's saying good evening.
Good evening. It's Friday night, and my walk got cut a little short today, so my dad could get on the podcast. Cosmo, come here.
He's a Zoom hog.
He is. So our neighbors are moving, and so they were one group moved out, and it looks we're getting new neighbors, and I don't think he's too happy with all the trucks and stuff that are people out there back and forth, but he'll be all right.
Yeah.
So it's Friday night. We're gonna talk triathlon again, which is awesome. Kind of the once again highlight of the week. It's funny. I was having a conversation with somebody earlier this week, and we spent about 45 minutes talking triathlon. I'm like, man, this is like what I like to do. It's just talk about triathlon. This is great. And we're gonna try a little bit of different stuff tonight. We're gonna go through a few different topics. So I'm kind of excited about that. How's your week going, John?
It's going good. Ready for the weekend though, and looking forward to some warmer weather. My goodness.
I know, right? I can't believe this week we were going swimming and we were wearing our like knitted hats.
Yeah.
Like it's almost April. We shouldn't be doing that, but it's supposed to be nice on Sunday for a nice bike ride day. So I'm looking forward to a nice day outside.
Yeah, I'm hoping both Saturday and Sunday are nice days. Yeah, I close to my camper, but so I actually worked on my door last night, and I stained it and put some clear coat on afterwards. And I said, oh, okay, well, I'll just leave it out tonight. And then it rained.
Oh no.
And where'd that come from? I mean, what is with our weather people there? I did not get a warning that it was going to rain.
What night was that? Last night?
Last night.
I don't know if it rained on our side of town. Maybe just.
I don't know.
Oh, wow. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to start out with a little tech update. And why this kind of came to fruition is there's been a lot of news recently on bike pedals, and we've talked about some bike pedals, but in the last 3 weeks or 4 weeks, SRAM bought Time, and I know you're a Time pedal fan.
Yep, that's right.
So there is some thought that maybe we'll see some Time power meter pedals. That's what that's what I heard on a different podcast, which would be pretty cool for people that are fans of Time pedals. I know you really like Time pedals.
It's one of those. I got started with them early on, and you get used to the type of movement that the brand has, and so I've always been very comfortable on them.
Yeah. So I think that's pretty exciting. And then 2 weeks ago, Wahoo, who acquired Speedplay earlier this year, they announced new pedals, and probably most exciting is they're going to have power meter pedals in Speedplay. And I have not used Speedplay, but I've considered it because they're the most aero pedals. And now that they're going to have a power meter, I might have to wait till I think it's June or July. They said that those are going to come out. So that's kind of exciting. And then
I really like the power meter in the pedal, even though I have not used those.
Yeah.
Because it's the closest you can get to what the person's doing.
Yep.
And I think that's the crankbase system is the next closest, but that has some issues, and the hub-based I think is also really good, but you need a hub power meter for every wheel set that you have. So I'm really glad to see the advancement in the technology.
And then just this week, Garmin comes out with new pedals.
Yep.
And they're actually available to order. And we were actually talking about this when we talked about power meters, that one of the things was you couldn't get the Shimano SPD cleat in a power meter, and that's what they came out with for road. They also came out with a new mountain bike or gravel pedal as well. Kind of pricey though, $1,100 for the road pedals. But here's the thing: is they have no competition.
Yeah.
Right? If you want to keep with your Shimano SPDLs, I guess, or is it SPDs? SPDs. That's what you're going to have to go at. But I think it's exciting that we're getting these new products. I think some of us were worried that, with COVID, that new products might be hard to,
Yeah.
hard to come by. And, we've heard all these things about like supply chain limitations. And so I'm for one, I'm kind of excited. I think the more power meter pedals we get into the market, hopefully this will drive the price down.
No, for sure. Now, the one downside of having the power meter on the pedals is it's pretty exposed.
Yeah.
And I actually broke a pedal a couple of weeks ago.
You
'Cause
did.
I went around a turn too fast and laid the bike down and
Oh,
hit the pedal on the ground. And
did you crash?
I guess technically you could say I crashed. The rubber side was no longer down. So,
Well, was your body on the ground?
my body was on the ground.
Okay, then you crashed.
That's right. And it's always funny, when that happens. When I was young, just get up and get going. But now I'm like, I lie there for a second. I'm like, I gotta assess what just happened. So,
Yeah,
but
it's pretty
then
funny.
I start biking again, and then all of a sudden my foot was doing something weird, and I'm like, what is going on? And ended up that the pedal was cracked. And
Oh, so it wasn't your foot, thankfully, that cracked. It was the
no,
pedal.
that's right. That's right. The pedal took the heat.
It is funny to think about, right? Like when we were kids, I'm sure you had a BMX bike and different bikes, and how many times you crashed and you scraped up your elbow or your
That's right.
blood's going down your arm. I'm good. I'm good. Like
Right.
you're invincible. And
Yeah.
now it's like, man, if I fall over at a stoplight, I might end up in the emergency
Yeah.
room.
So I think with the power meter pedals, I think one of the things I'll be looking at is the warranty.
Yeah.
And what's covered and what isn't covered.
Yeah, it's true, right? Like if you think about it, an individual pedal, if it's $500 per pedal and you lay it down and it breaks, what are your options?
But I like the pedal also because it's easy to switch between bikes.
Yeah, and if you
And
travel
crank sets and
and you want to rent a bike,
yeah.
and I think we talked about it a couple weeks ago as well. Like I really want to mess around with some different length crank arms, but my power meters are in my cranks, and
Right.
so that's like, just to change my crank arm to try it is going to be a significant amount of money.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, I think this is, I don't know if what's driving this, if it's the population or the companies, but it looks like we're going more and more towards pedals being the primary source for most people.
Yeah.
So at least what's in them.
We'll have to keep watching the development of that. So
Yep. So that's a pretty cool stuff. So speaking of pedals, we have a grad student that is doing a little research on some pedal technology. Do you want to talk about that?
yeah, that's Caitlin Conroy. She's one of our master students working in the lab. And she's tried several projects on, but we came up with this project mostly because of limitation of COVID-19, but it's also a really neat idea too, in that we are going to look at how well you can pedal and perform on your bike in flat bottom pedals.
Yeah,
So,
I think this is fascinating.
well, it takes us back to the old days when we would race. A lot of times we would wear the same shoes on the bike and on the run. This is before, this is really early stage triathlon, and you'd have toe clips that you would put your foot into, and then even in the duathlon world early on, they created a flat sort of toe clip that you could slide your running shoe in so it doesn't get stuck on the grips of the old pedals, old flat bottom pedals. And so but those went away with better design of cycling shoes, and shoes that one seemed to be really good for cycling, but then also were easy to transition between. But with the emergence of some super sprints, it started becoming apparent that you probably could save a little bit of time in transition if you could use the same shoes on the bike and on the run.
Yep.
And so we looked back in the literature, and actually we couldn't find anything really looking at how flat bottom pedals may influence cycling performance.
Yeah.
And so that's what she's going to do. She's going to do She's going to have people who they need to have their own smart trainer. They need to have their own, put pedals and shoes, and they need to know how to change the pedals out so that they will send them some flat bottom pedals. And then we're going to have them do 2 tests. What do we decide? 20-minute. You're going to give it a good effort for 20 minutes, and you're going to separate the test. I think she's got it for a week.
Yep.
And so one time you'll wear your shoe pedal interface that you normally have, and then another time you'll be wearing running shoes and flat bottom pedals.
Yeah. So I'm just thrilled by this study for multiple reasons. Number one, because I want to know.
Yep.
Actually, this kind of came about as well, not just in the super sprint, but in which technically is super sprint, but it was in the relays. And
Mm-hmm.
When they decided that the relays were going to be in the Olympics, so where we have basically 4 super sprint triathlons back to back to back, so it's mixed relays. The idea is that you could basically lose the group, right? You get off the bike, and by changing your shoes, you could lose that run group, and how important it is to stay with the run group. And then how things would basically cascade from there, because then the next person might be off of the swim group, and so you're not getting on their feet, and then the next person off of the bike group, and it cascades down if you give up even 5 or 6 seconds
Mm-hmm.
on the shoe change. And so yeah, I think that's absolutely fabulous. The other thing I think is really interesting, John, and we started talking about this, but when we really think about the future of research in endurance-based sports, or just sports in general, it might actually leave the lab,
Yeah.
and move to the data that people are collecting.
Mm-hmm.
Just think about, like, when you're on your trainer at home, the amount of data you're getting.
That's right.
And even a few weeks ago when we're talking about run metrics, the amount of data you can get outside in the real world was only available in labs 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that, the fact that Caitlin is doing this remotely is actually very much in line with where the future, I think, the practical application of research is going. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
No, I think it's great. I think we're all doing, like you said, all this data collection, with our Garmin watches, our foot pods, our heart rate monitors, all these devices that we're wearing, we're uploading those data. And if we can mine those data, it can really be valuable. And we've got another student who's working on, she's developing her project, still hasn't refined it fully, but ultimately going to be looking at getting data sets from people who've done ultra marathons, and then looking at run metrics over that ultra marathon. And that's going to be, it's going to be hard to dissect the data, because it's going to be, all different elevation changes and temperatures and different types of courses, but you got to start somewhere. And if you can start figuring out an algorithm to read those data points in, it can be really valuable. So I think this, we call it data analytics or big data. I think that's going to be a next big push with the research. And so you're not, like you said, you're not in the lab doing this. You're outside and getting, real world data.
Yeah, it's real world stuff we're able to get, and you're not stuck in the confines of the lab. Now, yes, you're going to have some variables that maybe you can't control for, but real world is that's what we're all talking about here, isn't it? Like, in kinesiology and in sports performance, we don't care how well you do in the lab. Like, there's no title for the best VO2 max. Like, they don't give an Olympic medal for that. Maybe they should, right? The highest VO2 max wins a medal, or the highest 6-minute power on an ergometer wins. They don't do that. What we're talking about is the real life practical application, which I think is super cool.
Totally. But researchers, we're control freaks.
I know.
And so that's the beauty of a lab, is that you can control lots of extraneous variables and then manipulate one or maybe two, and then try to really tease out the influence of changing that variable. Whereas when we do field work like this, it's a different kind of hard, because now you really need to dissect and really get into the granular level of what's going on. For example, I wore my watch during, I set to run mode, but I ran in the water. So it looks like I'm running a 20-minute mile. All right. And so if I just send my data off to someone, that's what they're going to see is, oh, he's doing a 20-minute mile, but that's running in the water. And so it, not until you say, hey, why is this a 20-minute mile? Can you start trying to understand, okay, where does this data set belong in my analysis? That's the hard part.
I totally agree. But then I take it to the real world triathlon stuff,
Yeah.
right? How can you in a lab get somebody to do an Ironman?
Mm-hmm.
Like really?
Yeah.
Even if you could pay them enough, say, hey, you're gonna go swim in this pool for this amount, then you're gonna get on our ergometer and you're gonna do 112 miles, and then you're gonna come on to a treadmill and run 26.
So that where you're going is there's actually some real problems with high performance research, and a lot of times the model that we end up using, and I don't use this because I actually think it's too limited in application, is time to exhaustion.
Yep.
And so what you often do in a test, and we may get to a little bit when we start talking about training the gut, you start seeing how long someone will continue to exercise, and a lot of nutrition work has been built around that. But that's fraught with limitations and confounding factors, because sometimes you just get bored and you're just I'm done, as opposed to a real true exhaustion. So I love the race model, but again, you've lost control over a lot of things when you say, let's go study a race, because now you've got to account for strategy.
Yep.
You've got to account for who else is in the race. And, that's why, jumping over to the sub 2 hour marathon. I don't know. I don't know when we'll see that broken, because you've got to win the race. And so you're using the strategy to win the race. You're not using the strategy to break 2 hours.
I think we will see it broken within this decade. And here's what I think is going to happen. This is just my thought on it. Is there'll be a race like Berlin, which is flat, and there'll be like a $2 million bonus.
That's what you got to do. Is you got to put a premium on getting under 2 hours. Yeah.
You put down $2 million or $3 million, and I think that would change. It wouldn't be about winning the race. It'd be about getting that paycheck.
That's right.
And, just think about time to exhaustion, John. How different would your lab test be if your time to exhaustion, you thought it was 60 minutes, but if you could make 65 and they're going to give you $1 million.
Yeah, right.
You probably can go 5 more minutes, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And that's one of the big limiters to time to exhaustion. I think you're already alluding to that. So yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I think this is super cool that Caitlin is doing this model, because I do think that there is a lot of opportunity out there to actually to data mine, basically.
Well, and I was ready. I won't be racing next weekend, but I was ready to go put flat bottom pedals on my time trial bike and just try it in real world. It's not far off from what we did back in the 80s. Yeah. So it would have been neat to try it, because a lot of times people think on the pedal stroke we pull up a lot. We don't actually pull up a lot. Maybe if we're going up a hill, then we're actually really physically. A lot of times what you're doing on the pedal is you're trying to just lift your legs so you're not working against yourself.
Exactly.
That's what you're doing, and you're not getting propulsion from that upstroke. You're just trying to get your weight off the pedal, so that when you're pushing down with the other pedal, you're not also trying to lift your leg. So
yeah, the only time I lift up on the pedals is if I'm in a race and it's a bike race and I'm sprinting.
That's it. Sprinting, you got to be
climbing a hill. If it's a very, very short, steep hill, so let's say I'm on a bike path or something, and all of a sudden I've got 15%. Yeah, then very briefly I might. But like in a triathlon,
no,
I wouldn't. I can't imagine like really lifting hard up on the pedals. The only thing I can think of as far as the downside is is the stiffness of the shoe. But now
Yeah.
we're running in carbon plated shoes.
I know.
So maybe it's not so bad.
Mm-hmm. No, and you could do actually an innovative thing with midsoles if you can use flat bottom pedals. So we'll see where that all goes, but it'll be fun. It'll be neat. It's a neat project, neat twist on an old idea, and I always like that.
Well, I think we talked about it, but if everything goes well with COVID, I'm in the Super Sprint World Championships in August.
Awesome.
And I'm hoping we'll have our data before then.
Yeah, that's right.
Because if it ends up being that there's basically no difference, I'll bring a pair of flat bottom pedals.
Yep, it'll be great.
I'll probably be the only one.
Yeah, that's right. Setting a trend now.
Exactly.
Well, okay, so let's switch gears to our next topic, which was more tech stuff, and that's Strava.
So I need you to let me share my screen.
Yep.
So yeah, Strava had an update. I guess it was about a month and a half ago, and I didn't really notice it until I was on my training camp last week and building routes. And so Strava's got a new feature in their route builder, and I just think it's awesome. So this obviously is Vegas, right? And we talked about how we build routes before. So I live kind of in this area. John lives kind of in this area. If I wanted to, set a route, it automatically tells me that's a good route to do. Although I would never. Actually, I would have done that when in the height of COVID. I would have rode my bike straight up Las Vegas Boulevard, but I normally wouldn't. But there's a few things that they've added that are pretty cool. So we've always had, and this on the left-hand side, this global heat map. And this shows you, and this is now set for riding, this shows you where people in general ride. So if we go and look at the Las Vegas map, actually, it's this one. We can kind of see the thicker the line is where people ride. And so historically, that's what I've used to help me build a route, especially if it's a city that I'm not familiar with or an area of Las Vegas I'm not familiar with. I'm like, okay, yeah, that's where I want to ride. The downside to that is if there is a huge event, let's say there's a big bike fondo or something like that, and they close the road down for that, that would still show up as a lot of people use that route, and would not necessarily be a good route for me to use. Now, what they added, which is super cool, is this button here, which is your personal heat map. So this, believe it or not, is everywhere I've ever ridden in Las Vegas.
That's pretty good, Ted.
I know, right? I was like, when I first saw that, I was really excited about that. And so now I realize I've got to ride more in here, a little bit more in here, and definitely more down in Green Valley, so I can, get all of the roads.
Oh.
But what's super cool about this is that when you're building a route, you can say, oh yeah, I remember I rode there before.
Yeah.
And what I was going to share was.
Oh, I'm looking at the racetrack on there.
Oh yeah, that was
corporate challenge. Yeah.
Corporate challenge, yeah.
Yeah.
So if we zoom out a little further, we can actually see I've ridden a lot in Southern Nevada.
Yeah.
But if we take this, I've ridden a lot of places. If we take this out further into San Diego, where I was, and start to look in San Diego, when I was down there, I was building my routes, and then I could have. It was really interesting because I could remember when I was riding those places.
Yeah.
And I can remember, oh yeah, that was a good route to do, or that was not a good route to do, and it really helped me during that time. So I was pretty excited about this. It was really cool because this is global.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about going up and down the California coast.
Yep.
So you can see I've been pretty much a long way up the California coast, and it's good, right? It helps you remember where you've been. I went and I looked at when I was in Australia and when I was in Europe.
Well, it'd be neat if they do the next update where they attach your pictures to those different areas.
Okay, so they do that.
Oh, okay.
So, but not in Strava. So Strava owns another company called Velo Viewer. I don't know if you've ever seen that webpage. And if you are a member of Velo Viewer, which is also more money, you can actually get your pictures
Mm-hmm.
that you've taken wherever you are as well.
Yep. Okay.
So that is, I mean, so maybe that'll be the next step that'll happen in Strava, since that technology does exist and they own that company. So anyways, I just wanted to share that with you. I thought that was super cool. And then I'll share it again, maybe in a couple of years when I've actually filled in the holes for every major road in Las Vegas.
That's pretty good. Now, that's biking and running?
So that's just biking, and I can actually switch it to running. And my running map is not nearly as robust,
Yeah.
but it takes a lot more to run.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. And you can see like my cluster is obviously near my house and near the university.
Yeah.
But even still, like when if we were to go back down to California, we can actually see, where I've ran in California as well.
Yeah. You like the coast?
It's just pretty.
Yeah, it is.
It's just pretty.
Mm-hmm.
So, and maybe if I lived there, I wouldn't like it so much, but we just don't have the ability, we just don't have the ocean. So,
yeah.
So anyways, yeah, that was pretty cool stuff. So let's move on into this article.
Yeah.
So this is a 2017 article, and just some information for everybody. I've struggled with my gastrointestinal system. John, you've had your struggles with the gastrointestinal system. Almost every endurance athlete at some point or another has issues with their gastrointestinal system. So as I was, researching for myself, as I tend to do, and actually even this one was talking to my students about this, I came across this article and it was really good. It's a really good article talking in general about the limitations to our gut, and that those limitations are trainable,
Mm-hmm.
which is pretty cool because we've talked about this before. In longer distance racing, one of the major issues and major things that will slow you down is lack of carbohydrates, or lack of carbohydrates, lack of blood glucose. And the problem is, and we've talked about this before as well, is that you can only hold so much beforehand, right? So you have a certain amount that you hold in your liver, and a certain amount that you hold in your muscles, and a very small amount in your blood. And in general, most people they have about 90 minutes worth of glucose, for an individual event. And so if you think about 90 minutes, even for an Olympic distance race, we're looking at, for most people, 2.5, 3 hours, right? So the problem comes in is you cannot bring in carbohydrates as fast as you utilize them. And John, you've obviously raced a lot more of long races. Historically, what have you done to kind of mitigate that, or to get more carbohydrates in, or more fuel in?
Well, it's a good question, because I'm in the same boat as you, is that I've had lots of GI problems. And it's interesting, looking at this paper, they only cited about 50% of people had GI problems, which I actually would have thought that would have been a higher percentage. Now, I guess it depends on what level of problem they're actually dealing with.
And I don't think that they talked about like the distance that people do either, right? It was just
Right.
in endurance athletes. Well, an endurance athlete, it could be somebody that, for example, does 10Ks,
Mm-hmm.
right? And maybe a little bit different, phenomenon. But I think you're right. So it's probably somewhere between 50 and 70%.
Yeah, and so you're right about right now we probably have anywhere from 60 minutes to 2 hours in terms of available glucose for exercise.
Yeah.
If we're doing high intensity, and so we're talking. I think let's put this in a context. We're interested in how to fuel for a half or a full type of race, or really anything longer
Let's
than
say 5 hours to 15 hours.
Yeah, that's right. And so the trick is, how do you get the right fuel in and how do you make it available to the muscle? Because you have a limited capacity of storing glucose. So you need to take in glucose. And so we use this word exogenous glucose, or external to the body, you're bringing it in. But you also have fats. And that's been really about 8-10 years ago, there was a big push to train to use fats more. But now I think that pendulum has swung back to carbohydrates.
I do too.
And trying to figure out how to get the right amount of carbohydrates in. Now, one of the, and this paper does a nice job of talking about the recommendations for how much carbohydrate to get in. And people probably have heard a number like 60 grams per hour. That number actually comes from how fast your liver can release glucose. And when the liver releases glucose, it's putting it in the blood, and then the blood, and that's the blood glucose, delivers it to the muscle. And then the muscle can then use it, because there's glucose in the muscle, blood, and liver, like you mentioned. But the liver can only release it at a certain rate. And so the whole idea has always been to try to take in the right amount of glucose to minimize the liver from becoming depleted. And that's where that 60 gram per hour comes in.
Well, I think the 60 gram per hour is also in this, in what we have up here, in that sodium dependent glucose transporter 1.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was thought to be about the limit of that one transporter as well. So it actually matches the liver. So maybe we should, maybe I'll talk really briefly about this picture, because I think it's really important that we actually see this. So this is the inside of your intestine. This is on the other side. So basically going into your body. And we have two basic receptors for sugars coming into the body. So you have the SGLT1, so sodium dependent glucose transporter 1, and GLUT5, which is your glucose transporter 5. Now there are others, but they don't work nearly as efficiently as these two. And the issue on absorption has always been that, well, for the most part, people were only utilizing glucose, and these transporters would become saturated. And what I mean by saturated is they could only bring in, once again, 60 grams per hour. And if you put more than that in, it would just go through your intestines and potentially creates situations where you have diarrhea. And because basically it goes past the small intestine into the large intestine, where it can no longer be brought up. So the figuring out of that, and what this paper really talks about is that we can train this to take up more. And which I think was, to me, I had no idea until I read this paper how trainable it was and how quickly it could be trained.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I love that you're talking about the absorption in the intestines. So just so people know, your digestion actually starts by chewing at the mouth, and what's happening up here. Then it goes into your stomach, but that's not where absorption's happening. And you have to get the substance out of the stomach. So we call that gastric emptying, and then into the intestines. And that's where you absorb your carbohydrates into the bloodstream.
Yeah, and this only happens in your small intestine and really in the first third and second third.
Mm-hmm.
After that, it's not absorbed anymore.
Yeah.
And so if you think about it, if you were to just pound a bunch of water and a bunch of sugar into your system, and you overwhelmed these transporters, it's just going to bypass it. Mm-hmm. And that bypassing, once it hits the large intestine, creates a lot of the gastrointestinal issues that people have. Mm-hmm. So I think that to me, like the really exciting thing here was how quick you could train this. I don't know if was it 3 to 5 days? Mm-hmm. And the number was pretty awesome. It was 3 to 5 days of 400 grams of was it glucose or was it just carbohydrates? I can't remember off the top of my head.
I think it was glucose.
Yeah, 400 grams of glucose per day for 3 to 5 days,
Yep.
and you could significantly increase the expression of these proteins, the transporters, and bring in more glucose.
And
So
what's interesting about that is, that goes back to the days where we used to do carbo loading.
exactly, that's exactly what I was going to bring up. Yes.
But the research really sort of disproved any effectiveness of carbo loading for the sake of loading up more carbohydrates inside you. But maybe what was really happening with these carbo loading parties is this process of training the gut.
Yeah, and maybe what they should have done was do the carbohydrate loading parties and have an extended party, right? A week-long spring break party where for 5 days in a row or 4 days in a row.
Well, technically, that's how the research started, is that it was in essence a multi-day carbo loading. And carbo loading a day before your event was doing nothing.
Yeah.
But you needed at least 3 days in this research study. I think it was Costo who did it.
Yeah.
You need at least 3 days of high carbohydrate diet. And you also needed to mix that in with high intensity exercise to deplete the body, then have lots of carbohydrate. And the idea was that you were going above your normal storage of carbohydrate.
But yeah, I think you're right. It's not about storage, it's about transportation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing that was interesting, and I'd known this before, was that you could also, if you get the right mix of glucose and fructose, you could use 2 different transporters.
Yeah, right.
So we've known that for a while now, that the best thing you can do as far as bringing on carbohydrates after you've trained your gut properly is to bring in a mix of glucose and fructose, because if this becomes saturated, you still have the ability to bring in fructose instead. And oh man, and then I do believe that fructose also skips some of the metabolism in the liver and actually becomes really active very early. I can't remember the exact physiology there. The other thing on this, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, the other thing on this figure that I like is it's got the galactose, the glucose, and the fructose there. And that's the whole idea, is to have different sources of carbohydrate.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the other thing that's interesting is that we have another transporter on the other side of the enterocyte here. And this is the GLUT2 transporter. These are not rate limited. So basically whatever can get in here can get out on this side. So it wasn't that it was limited on this side, it was limited on this side. And then the paper went on further to talk about sodium, because this is a sodium dependent glucose transporter. So one of the things that they couldn't confirm completely in this paper was the need for sodium at the same time.
Yeah.
But that's kind of accepted, that if you're hyponatremic, for example, where you didn't have enough sodium, that potentially could affect the SGLT1. So another reason to have some sodium in our our sports beverages. But well, yeah, I thought this is fabulous.
Yeah, it is. And I like the other figure where they talk about the GI yeah, that one.
Yes. Yeah, this one took me a while to kind of figure it out, what exactly it was trying to say.
Yeah.
But basically, if you have a single carbohydrate source, which is either one, right? If it's how to explain it? If it's a single one, it's the black, right? And multiple transports is the blue.
Yep.
If you bring in 60 grams of just the black, so that's single source. So in this case, it would, we were just talking about it, it would be just glucose.
Yep.
You can only get to about 60 grams before you're actually likely to have, if you keep bringing in more, you're likely to have gastrointestinal issues earlier. Whereas if you bring in dual source, you can actually bring in more carbohydrates before you have issues.
Yeah, and that's so you're right. So the y-axis is exogenous carbohydrate. That's your external, what you're bringing in. That's your drinks,
Yeah.
And
And
on that,
how much you're utilizing. So it's
yep.
oxidating.
And,
Yep.
and the x-axis is how fast you're taking it in.
Yep.
So that's grams per hour. And so, and again, there's that 60 grams per hour number that has been floating around. And I always worry about absolute numbers, but
Yeah.
it's a number that has been recommended before. But now, I mean, look at that. To take in 90 grams per hour or 120 grams per hour, that's a lot of carbohydrate per hour.
Yep.
But that they're demonstrating this graph is that you can have very low risk of GI problem when you are doing two things. One, in taking multi sources of carbohydrate, and then two, the training part, that you are training your gut. But I don't know. I have not tried to take in 90 grams per hour on purpose. I probably have.
Here's the thing, like, have you tried to train it?
Yeah, that's right.
Have I, and that's something I was actually considering doing, like with one of my, my pre-race training sessions coming up, where it's going to be intense and I'm going to be going for several hours.
Yeah.
Was like, you know what, let's do this the week before, do the 400 grams per day, and then let's try and take in 90. Because if I could get in 90, so if, and just to break it down for people, 90 grams of carbohydrate is 360 calories. Am I correct on that? Like 4 times 9?
Yeah, that's it.
So 360 calories. John, do you have any idea in general for you, let's say at a half Ironman or an Ironman, how many calories per hour you're utilizing? Or
I was trying to do, I always target around 200. I did try to do a higher number. I was using a specific drink for that.
How many are you using? I'm sorry, your body.
I'd have to go back and look at my notes. I do have that. I did actually try to do the math on that. And that's where I came up with, I was trying to shoot for 200 calories. But I did try to go to 300 calories an hour, and that was too much.
Yeah.
But I don't think I trained it right either. So,
So in general, when we look at high level athletes in a half Ironman or even an Ironman, because when you're talking about, like the 1%ers, they don't have much difference in their actual intensity, and but you're looking at between 800 and 1,000 calories per hour they're utilizing, depending on the size of the person, right? A bigger person is going to utilize more. So let's say for me, if I'm going to go 5 hours and I'm utilizing 800 calories per hour, and I can only bring in 240.
right.
So you go down to 60 times 4. I'm going to be in a calorie debt pretty quickly. And you're right. Like some of that calorie will be utilized, will be fat, but a lot of it, especially when we're talking about the intensity levels we're talking about, so like 85% of threshold, we're talking about a lot of glucose is being utilized. So
and just to tap into that, I mean, the benefit of taking carbohydrate is it converts to energy faster.
Very fast. Yeah.
You don't necessarily get the same amount, but it just happens faster. Whereas fat takes just a little bit longer to go from the fat state to energy.
Yeah, it's kind of like the rocket fuel versus diesel fuel.
Right?
A lot of bang for your buck with carbohydrates. It happens quickly, burns quickly. Whereas your fat, yeah, exactly.
So we want to be that blue line.
Yep.
And let's talk about their recommendations for the training part. I really like that. And I really like the hot dog.
The hot dog eating contest.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, that does make a lot of sense to tie that in here. I would not have thought that a paper like this was going to talk about a hot dog eating contest. So being from New York, there was always the Coney Island competition. So it is, repulsive to see people eat that many hot dogs. I think it's down near the end.
There's the 400 grams per day. For 3 days. So
as part of the training, right. Yeah. They've got that nice figure near the end.
Yeah, you're right. It's not that one.
This one. Yeah, this is a great.
This is really good. Yeah.
So I like this because it has in that first bubble, training the gut method, and then they go into the actual physiological effect of that technique and then the benefit. And so what what we can be doing is trying to understand when we are having problems, we can look at the physiology and say, okay, what's the problem? And maybe go backwards and see what type of training method we might want to use, and see if we can alleviate those GI problems. But I like these training the gut method points. These are really good.
Yeah, it's really interesting, John, because you've talked to a lot of athletes. I've talked to a lot of athletes, and a lot of them say, "Oh, I can't run with food in my stomach, or I can't run with, I got to go in the morning fasted because I just it bothers me too much." Well, what we've seen in this paper is that might be true, but it's trainable,
Yep.
right? And if you think about it, can you imagine going into a half Ironman or an Ironman with nothing?
Mm-hmm.
Like you slept, so you're actually going to be waking up with a relatively low carbohydrate level or blood glucose level, and
Mm-hmm.
then it's like, well, whenever I swim, I can't have anything in my stomach or I'm in trouble. Or they're like, okay, well, you know what, my swim starts at 6:30, so I got to wake up at 3:30 to eat.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Well,
not great strategies.
no, it's not, and that's why I love these. In fact,
Yep.
the very first one, you always think about it, but I just never really, I haven't done this on purpose. So I like this training with relatively large volumes of fluid to train the stomach. So and this is the hot dog eating contest
Yep.
example, is that you can train your stomach to take in more volume. Okay, you can stretch it. All right, and
And
that's what
what does it do, right? Like it does these two things.
that's right. Well, but you know one it again, not until I read this paper did I really start thinking about it a little bit differently. One, it does get you used to having a larger volume in your stomach. So you're going to have that less of a feeling of bloating because your stomach is already used to being that size. From, a class perspective, I've always taught that the gastric emptying can be increased by having more volume. And so that's why you often want to sip your drink, consistently and keep some volume in your stomach versus doing, a big gulp and then not having anything for a while and then another big gulp. You want to try to keep your stomach distended because it helps with gastric emptying. But it really does, it would make sense that it actually helps with the feeling of bloated too, because if you train it to be larger, it's not going to feel bloated at that point.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I like the next one, training immediately after a meal, because
Yep.
very few times do I do that. Now, the odd time will be on a long ride on a Sunday morning.
Mm-hmm.
Sunday's usually my long ride. And I know if I'm going out for 4 or 5 hours, I got to have a meal first.
Yep.
And it's pretty much the only time I really will do that. But then I started thinking about it. What is stopping me from having a nice sized lunch and then jumping on the treadmill for 20 minutes?
Well, and I usually do this on the bike like you. I'll eat a big breakfast before a long ride, but I'm not doing a big breakfast before my long run.
Yeah.
And I think that's something I need to change, is do a big breakfast and then go for a run.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But I actually think maybe start out, John, with a medium to small size breakfast and then work up.
Yeah. You got to know where the restrooms are along the way, that's for sure. But
For sure. Yeah, for sure. The next one was training with relatively high carbohydrate during exercise.
yeah.
So this is something that you made mention of, and is obviously a big thing. Is people doing fasted training and people thinking that you know um, fasted training is the way to go.
Hmm.
And there may be some physiologic benefits, especially if you're going to try and change your fat adaptation level. But I don't know. I was reading this article. I was already kind of pushing the other way
Hmm.
already, or towards this, but now this makes me even more cognizant of the fact that what, I need to have carbohydrates
Yeah.
while I'm exercising,
Right.
and I'm doing it for training my system.
Hmm.
Because if we look at this, that one points to here, points to
Yeah.
here. Oh, sorry. and points to here, which is
Well,
the
and this is where there's a lot of different advice out there
yeah,
regarding this. And you hear terms like metabolically flexible
yeah,
or train low, race high, train low carb, race on lots of carbohydrate. And man, there's so sometimes it's even contradictory. And so you really you need to try these things out, which is terrible from a research perspective that we do all this work and then we say, well, you got to try it out and see what works for you. But it does make sense to train your body to be able to use carbohydrate. Uh, even though again that pendulum swung away from carbohydrate for a while, I think it is swinging back, and that just having fats as a fuel during high intensity exercise, you're probably limited.
yeah. And then the idea of train low, race high, not if you haven't trained your gut.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. This is you're right. You gotta
Yeah. So
try it out.
if you're gonna do that, where you train low, race high, maybe you should train low and then train high for the week before, or the 3 days before, or 5 days before,
Yeah.
and then race high as well.
Now, I don't want to discount that there's a number of people who can be very successful on a low carbohydrate intake during a race.
Yeah.
And I think of people who are diabetic in particular, it's really important for them to explore alternative ways to fuel during an endurance event.
Yeah.
And it is possible. You know, the advantage of being able to use carbohydrate though is that when you're having these bouts of higher intensity, like if you're having undulating course, you're out of the saddle, you're in the saddle, you're up a hill, running up a hill, down a hill, or even swimming, waves and what have you. The carbohydrate does deliver energy faster, but oh man, there's still some advantages to just being able to use fat as a fuel as well.
I think, John, you're right, but I think for the majority of people that, well, I don't want to say majority of people. I think you need to look at, I don't know how to put it. Number one, I guess, is to think about your goal as far as are you doing this to go as fast as you possibly can,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if you are, using fat as a fuel is possible, but it takes many months, if not years, to train to do that. So most people are going to be still in the carbohydrate side of things. And if your goal is to go as fast as you can, I think this is a good model to look at. I just speaking of myself in in a half Ironman, on the run part, I can tell you, like, I'm a heart rate of 155. My max heart rate is 175.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm working hard.
Yep.
I would love to take in more carbohydrates, but I've always been so skittish about, the bloating and the diarrhea and, and the negative consequences of those things. But
And I think where I thought you were going to go is if you do lower intensity, you have a lot more options.
That's exactly where I was going to go. So if, let's say, I was at 70% of my max heart rate, then, or 65%, then I am definitely in the fuel state where I can actually utilize a lot more fat for fuel. And we've talked about this in the past as well, but as we push harder, we utilize more carbohydrates and less fat.
Yeah, and so the challenge of like an iron distance event is more anecdotal, and it's interesting they didn't talk about it in this paper that I remember seeing. But once a gut goes offline, we call it, it's hard to get it back online.
Yeah,
and so it really is. Believe me, it's happened to me more than once, and you keep trying to come up with the right strategy, but it's you miss just a little bit, and all of a sudden you're you're struggling with GI problems and you can't take anything in, and
Yeah.
it makes for a long day.
I'm going to share this with you.
Okay.
So this is WKO5 again. It's
Yep.
such cool stuff. So what we have here, John, is the blue is when I am when I'm anaerobic.
Mm-hmm.
Green is aerobic. And for the most part, the more green you are, the more, in general, the more fat you're utilizing. Would you kind of agree on that?
Yep.
So if, for example, I'm at 300, or should I say 400 watts, which is this line here, I'm like 60% anaerobic, 40% aerobic.
Mm-hmm.
But when I get out to, I guess, well, not even going out in distance, just looking at wattage,
Mm-hmm.
Let's say I'm at 220 watts, 230 watts, which I'll do a half Ironman at, which is this right around, I guess the crossover point is getting, I don't know, right around here. I'm utilizing, I guess in this case, I'm mostly aerobic,
Yeah.
but I'm still utilizing a lot of carbohydrates at that point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to show, this because I think it's a cool chart to see the contributions. And this is only cycling for me.
Mm-hmm.
But and more, it's about the wattage more than the ultimately the time. But it's kind of I don't know, it's kind of cool to think about what energy sources or what systems ultimately you're utilizing at any given time. And I think we showed this.
No, I think we have, but this is great because, yeah, it always goes to my light bulb example, is that if you have a brighter light bulb, 400 watt light bulb, you need an energy source to convert at a fast rate. And in this case, that energy source would be carbohydrate.
Yeah.
That would be the potential chemical energy. If you only have, fat as a fuel, it just takes longer to convert that fat over. Again, I'm not trying to, I know we have athletes even in our club that do excellent with a fat primary diet. And I also want to be careful on that. When we start talking hard carbohydrate intake, that sometimes equates to lots of processed food.
Which it doesn't have to be.
That's right. And I think that's, something a lot of people are talking about more and more is how do you do this using, real foods? And jelly beans are not real food, by the way.
They're not, but I went to the grocery store just today and I got a pineapple. I got some, I bought a whole thing of apples and some bananas. And because, when I'm not out on the bike, where actually processed foods might actually be best because just the size of things to carry, right?
Mm-hmm.
To carry 6 apples would be a lot more of a challenge.
That's right.
But the rest of my life, other than chocolate, which I keep telling myself is my magnesium supplement.
Oh, there you go. I like that.
Just throwing that out there. I try and get my carbohydrates from real food. Right.
But you try to get them from what?
From real food.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Like not necessarily real. Everything's real food, but less minimally, let's say minimally processed carbohydrates when I can.
Mm-hmm.
But I also, on the bike, that's not going to happen. And if I was to go for a really long run, and let's say I would bring a gel just because it's just so easy to carry, and I can get 60 grams of carbohydrates in instantly in a little tiny pouch.
Yeah, right.
So it becomes a convenience issue more than it is anything else. No, but I agree with you, John. Like, I'm not discounting anybody's diet at all. No. I think that if I was, because I went fat adapted for a while. If I was to go back to doing fat adapted, because I was doing the fat adaptation with the idea of train low, race high, mm-hmm. I would then still train my gut that week before, so that I could get the best of both worlds. Mm-hmm. And I think you're right. Like, metabolic flexibility is it's a buzz term, but I think it's really also quite important to understand that if you go for a 4-hour bike ride at 65%, 70%, let's say you're doing a long, slow ride, you are training yourself to be metabolically flexible because you're not bringing in enough carbs to fuel yourself. So you are going to be utilizing fat. Yep. Like you just are. Mm-hmm. So Now, I look at it like that, like 4-hour bike ride, I'm utilizing mostly fat.
Yep. Well, this has been great. Really good to talk to. I'm glad you found this paper. I am going to eat a big breakfast tomorrow before I go work on my trailer.
What zone is the trailer work? Actually, that'd be a good little study. Like when you really get frustrated and you're out there, if you actually get into zone 2 at all.
Yeah, if we count swear words as training zones, it can be pretty high sometimes. So
We can look at your cortisol response. It probably looks a lot like training.
oh goodness, yeah. No, I'm going to try some of these things, and
too.
I'm going to try to make a goal of one, making sure I'm keeping track of my calories and grams of carbohydrate per hour. And then I'm going to see if I can tolerate or work up to something higher than 60 grams per hour and using a mixed source of them.
Yeah, I think right now, John, it'd be an interesting thing is without training, could you do 90 grams if you did 60 grams of glucose and 30 grams of fructose?
Yeah. Yeah.
You could just like, if that was your baseline, because I think for me personally, if I could bring in 90 grams in an hour, I think because right now I've been racing at about 60 with a mixed source.
Right. Right.
But if I could get to 90 without GI issues, I'd be pretty happy.
If I can get to any level without GI issues, that's
Yeah,
the goal.
and well, and maybe you could train yourself to do it. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know. That's the key, is just try to get to 0 GI problems.
Yes, I think that is if you and I ever figure that out, I think we'll be unstoppable. All right, John. Well, thanks for the chat, and we're gonna take a week off next week. So it's pre-race night.
Yeah, hopefully we've got our Tri Club event. We're planning on it. So
and so we'll be back in a couple of weeks for everybody.
in 2 weeks. All right. Thanks, Ted.
Okay. Bye-bye. Have a great weekend.
You too. Bye. All right.